This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer Ring podcast, I am in Krakow, Poland. My first time ever visiting Poland. We've just wrapped up several days of judging for the Craft Roku competition, a brewing competition for brewers here in Poland with over 800 entries from around Poland. Tasted some phenomenal beers, some really great beers, and learned a lot from judging with Polish judges here. But of course, since I'm here in Poland and here also presenting at the Polish Craft Brewers Symposium, I've been able to build some relationships with Polish brewers, and one of those is sitting right here with me, Marcin Ostajewski from Grodzisk Brewery. Welcome to the podcast, Marcin.
Welcome. It's awesome to be here.
So we couldn't come to Poland and not record a podcast about Grodziskie just because. And you all are the evangelists of Grodziskie worldwide. You have revived the brewery itself in Grodzisk, have revived that style and are not keeping it for yourselves. You're also sharing it with the entire world of brewing and trying to encourage more people to brew this historical Polish style. So through the course of this episode, we're going to talk about how you do that, what those fundamentals are, how that brewery came back into being, how you all brew Grodziskie from ingredients to process, and then the fascinating thing is to see how Grodziskie as a base style is now expanding in so many different directions here under creative direction, whether that's fruited beers or even Grodziskie made with fish.
Everything is possible.
Everything is possible here, and so we'll talk about the baseline historic approach, and then we'll also talk about some of the ways the brewers are finding creative ways to put a spin on their own Grodziskies. Before we do that, if you're looking for a brewery chiller that's worry-free and tough on GWP, then look no further. G&D Chiller's Elite 290 Series chiller uses propane as a natural refrigerant with extremely low global warming potential. This natural, highly efficient refrigerant with near zero GWP will help lower your facility's energy costs and impact on the environment. G&D Chillers is committed to a greener, more efficient future. Visit gdchillers.com to learn more. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropic strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off of your first order. Also, are you struggling to source affordable citrus ingredients due to market fluctuations? Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates at a better price point and with a more reliable supply. Old Orchard's citrus-flavored blends include blood orange, grapefruit, lemonade, lime, and tangerine. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Marcin. Let's talk about the history. Let's talk about both the history of the Grodziskie style and then how you all brought back the brewery itself and then set about recreating this style that for all intents and purposes had kind of fallen off. It was such an important historical style that then kind of disappeared, and you brought it back. So why don't you tell us walk us back through this history?
Yeah, sure. So the history, like the written history that you have proofs of, dates back to 1601, when in the city of Grodzisk, a guild of brewers had formed, and in the statute, they had like very specific list of guidelines how to make a proper beer. And since, of course, back then, the styles were not even somewhat regulated as styles, but they were referred as beer from that city,
Sure.
So
just like Budweiser was this the beer from Budweiss.
Yeah.
Pilsner, the beer from Pilsen, right.
Yeah, so for several centuries, the potential of Grodzisk as a city, as a brewer's city, grew, and it was even in the heyday in 1920s. The Grodziskie beer, so beers from different brewers in Grodzisk city,
Right.
were exported to 80 countries. So it was a huge thing, and even at the level of teaching how to brew, the school of brewers in Grodzisk was one of the most expensive within the boundaries of course, mainly Poland, and then during partitions in Germany. But still, imagine that a city of like 6,000 citizens had 30 brewers active. And we also laughed that they were doing collabs before it was cool.
Yeah.
Because almost none of the brewers had the complete setup. Meaning that there were brewers that only produced wort. They were brewers that only fermented the beer. And only one brewery at Kolejowa Street had a bottling line. And they were, in fact, only having a bottling line. So all the other brewers, after preparing the beer, transported the beer to this one street to bottle it. So it's a totally crazy setup. Yeah. And of course, they were all working together to develop a proper beer. Of course, there is also a legend connected with a water source in the city, which was kind of revived by a monk that became a saint later, because there was a plague, of course, and a problem with clean water and so on and so on. But still, this particular style, not only being the only style of Polish origin, was also a style of great recognition, and a beer like treated as one of the best beers available in whatever city that was able to import it. Yeah, so it was a huge beer, and the total annual production of all of the brewers, which were in 1920s unified to one company. By one man who spent a lot of time to Mr. Antoni Thum, a guy of Austrian origin that moved to Poland and fell in love in Poland, and probably also not the country. But still, he was able to connect all of the Grodzisk breweries and expand the production. So in the heyday, the total production was over 100,000 hectoliters a year. So it was, in fact, a huge, a huge thing. And then
roughly 85,000 brewers barrels per year. For those of us listening in
of course,
in the United States.
So in the communist times, of course, when there was shortage of everything, and of course, all of the private companies were incorporated to be country owned, the quality dropped a lot. There were several problems with the supplies, with the quality, and so on and so on. So the style already started to decline. And then in the 90s, when the big corporations entered Poland and invested in a lot of breweries,
quote unquote, invested.
Yeah, invested. So they chose, of course, the biggest breweries from different regions, but they also bought all of the smaller breweries around to say, oh my God, this small brewery is not profitable anymore, so let's cut this one and then concentrate on the big one. So in fact, in 1994, the last operating brewery in Grodzisk, in the city of Grodzisk Wielkopolski, totally ceased production. As you can imagine, when they stopped producing the beer there, they moved part of the equipment that was valuable for the bigger one, and the rest just stayed open to be basically stolen by random people. Yeah, so they left it to ruin. And after more than 20 years of hiatus, the brewery was revived. And this brewery was the one that consisted of a brew house and open fermentation vessels. And that was all, because the bottling was at the different place.
Oh, right.
When the brewery was bought by the big player and it was still operating for some years in the 90s, it was bottled in Poznań. So it was bottled in a bigger brewery, transported by cisterns. So when we rebuilt the original one, and we already operated in another brewery called Fortuna in the city of Miłosław, like 100 kilometers, 60, 70 miles away, we decided let's do the same thing as it was before. So let's just concentrate on brewing and fermenting and part of the maturation process, of course. And then let's move the beer to be bottled at our second facility. But there was also one trick. Grodziskie as a style was always bottle fermented. So, of course, it was a lot of work to safely transport the beer in cisterns to the other brewery. safely bottle it, inoculate it with a new fresh yeast, add some priming sugar, and do the proper re-fermentation process. But luckily, it all works.
Sure. So tell me about Fortuna, and you all have really approached this project with the brewery in Grodzisk as a labor of love for your own love of beer and the style. But tell me about Fortuna also.
So Fortuna is also a brewery of quite long history. It was founded in 1889 by a Polish entrepreneur that wanted to defend Polish-made businesses in the times of partitions. So to have some Polish business back then, it was quite successful. It was one of the first steam-powered breweries in the region, and it grew a lot. But then, of course, as you may guess, in the communist times, the same story. So
Sure.
When it was country-owned, huge decline in quality. No one invested in that because as long as it produces beer, why to spend some money on it? Yeah?
Right.
Let's do it as it is. Then
Good enough was okay.
yeah, good enough was okay. And then, of course, good enough declined. So in the 90s, it was taken back by the descendants of the original owners. They brought the production back, but of course, the amount of investments that would be necessarily to produce it in a decent way, they were not so successful. And then in 2012, the current owners took it. And the first thing, of course, was to invest a lot to refurbish it. And then it started to work very well. So only after 3 years, after taking the Fortuna brewery, they decided, let's revive Grodzisk.
Well, it's great that you all have both revived the brewery itself and the Grodzisk style. And I want to talk about the style itself, your approach to it, because it wasn't as simple as just pulling up an old recipe and like, hey, let's make this. Like there was a lot that had to go into even having the ingredients made so that you could make the beer and understand, because of course, and by that point, some of the references for how to make it in a quality way may have been, it wasn't exactly like there was a process or even in this brewery that hadn't been continually functioning. Let's talk about that. But first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroirs, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. So tell me a little bit about the process of creating or rediscovering, seeking back some of the those original Grodzisk recipes, and then thinking about how you make this style in a contemporary context, in a now new modern or more modern brew house, and with ingredients that even over 20 years those ingredients continue to change. Talk about that process of rethinking, reconsidering that recipe.
Yes, so luckily we had a lot of sources, mostly because of 1950s, 1960s. The head brewer of the former Grodzisk brewery was also a scientific guy. So he has written a lot of scientific articles about the process. So you still had the original source, but let's say adapted to those already modern approach from after the war. So he had separate articles about preparation of malt, because what I didn't say before, of course the brewers in Grodzisk back then had their own malt houses. So the malt was prepared close to the brewery.
Right.
And of course it was
pretty typical for
pretty typical. And then of course it got concentrated, and only specialized malt houses produce the malt. But still, we had precise information about the recipe, the yeast used, the selection of new strains, even in the 50s and 60s when they encountered some problems with the current strain bought from Germany. And we had those, and also what we had was the knowledge of the people that work in the brewery in the communist times. So luckily, when we revived the brewery and we were preparing to that, we interviewed all of the Grodziskie enthusiasts that we knew. Also, some professors from the university that were like very active in promoting the style, in preserving the style with the homebrewers. And also, we contacted former workers. And of course, among those, people from the laboratory, from the quality department, old brewers, and so on. And what was very interesting about that, when we did this research, and we did some trials with the help of our friend homebrewers, and presented them to those guys, we got two different let's say, sets of information that we got. One was whether those beers that we made align with the Grodziskie that they still have in mind.
Right.
But the other thing was also, before even testing that, how do they remember Grodziskie as a style? And as you can imagine, there was a huge variety in those houses.
Sure.
Because of the quality problems. And luckily, with our knowledge about the process, we knew what could be the cause in this variation. When you had information from the old brewers or old citizens, oh yeah, Grodziskie was, I don't know, hazy. Totally hazy, overcarbonated, sour. You knew that was probably the bad batch or something like that. Yeah. So luckily, we were able to combine all of it into the recipe. But then you have
It's interesting to like reverse engineer, but also correct for some of the historical problems that would have happened at the same time. So you're not just making like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. You don't want to make a bad version of that. You want to get back to some essence of what was best about it.
And also, luckily, because of that brewer, Mr. Schmelich from 50s, 60s, we also had old laboratory results of the Grodziskie. So anything, of course, basic parameters, but also some results about microbiology, pH and whatever. So we had also the numbers to align with those opinions. So luckily we got it, but then you have to bring back the ingredients because this was not said before. It's a very specific beer because it's a light smoked beer,
right,
based 100% on wheat. So I
guess we should probably say that. I just assume most people now know.
But luckily now it's obvious because a lot of people do great job in promoting the style. So
when you say a lot of people, I think you mean you and then Live Oak and some other people that have also kind of picked that up.
Yeah, luckily we have more and more ambassadors internationally.
Ambassadors.
And thanks for you, we will have more of those.
Here we are.
So, so we had those ingredients that we had to bring back. In fact, the easiest one was to bring back the yeast because we knew that the beer was bottle fermented, so it still contained living yeast. We also knew that they always used a blend of yeast, two strains, two ale strains, and one of the strains was highly flocculating, the other one was less flocculating. That's why when they produced the beer, after lagering, after maturation, when they bottled the beer, and of course they didn't add the yeast on purpose because they didn't have the technology for that. When they bottled the beer, still some part of the yeast was in the bottle, and then they either added priming sugar or earlier they even just bottled the beer when the fermentation was still going. So we recovered the yeast from the last bottles from 1994. Those yeast, in fact, were preserved by Professor Sadownik from Warsaw, the one who was promoting Grodziskie among the homebrewers. So he was basically the guardian that protected the style. So we took the yeast. Then we also knew that there was a specific variety of hops named tomyski. Close by to Grodzisk city, there's Nowy Tomyśl city, so from the city's name, the name of the variety. And luckily, this one was still available in Polish Agriculture Preservation Institute, something like that. Hard to translate it. But still, they had the living plants that they preserved for years. And luckily, with the help of our hop supplier, we were able to help him start to grow this hop again. So we got the hops back.
This is quite the project.
Yeah, it was quite a big project. Yeah. And then the hardest part probably was to get the malt back, because we knew that historically, of course, it was made just like in the breweries in Bamberg. The malt was kilned using smoke. So we knew that smoking a malt, which is already made, gives you a slightly different effect because you only smoke the grain from the outside. The smoke.
So what you're saying is, when you say malt that's already made, you mean malt that has been malted and then kiln dried, and then post kilning smoking that malt. That's
precisely.
Okay.
And when you get this approach, the malt is
which is the more common approach amongst larger maltsters, just because that it fits in their normal workflow, and
it's easier to manage, especially when you because of that you can offer more different
that
smoke
same
sources,
base malt can end up going down the smoke stream, or being not
the clean
smoked.
stream.
But that's actually not, historically speaking, how smoked malt was made. Smoking used to be the kilning process. Right.
In fact, back in the days, smoked malt was only the byproduct of a normal process.
Right. That was the kilning.
Yeah, and in fact, we also have a lot of sources on that. And that's also part of the Grodziskie profile, that the smokiness should be, of course, delicate in the background, because when, of course, all the modern maltsters started to produce the malt without the smoke, it was even an achievement for a traditional maltster that even though he is using oak wood to heat up the air, when the level of smoke is low, he's the good modern maltster. Yeah, I have the old technology, but I can do it with a small addition of smoke. So we searched for a long time, and we found a small maltster in the Czech Republic, Bruntal, and
because this is not like you can't just order now this malt off of the shelf. Like, this oak smoked weak malt that you needed did not exist in anyone's catalog at that point. So you had to, and then in terms of sourcing from a maltster that could make it, you needed to find someone who would then smoke that malt as part of the kilning process. So while that malt was still green, post malting, but before it was dry, they need to smoke it at that point in order to achieve the drying process, because you want that particular character of smoke.
Yeah, precisely. And luckily, the maltster in Czech Republic was totally open for that, even though he never malted wheat and he never used oak smoke for kilning. He was most of his production, even now, because as you can imagine, it's still a niche. So most of his production is smoking malt for the whiskey producers. So he uses barley and smokes it with peat or other woods, but not with oak. But he was very, courageous and very open to change. And of course, he still produces original Grodziskie malt like once in a year at the end of the season.
Not in huge demand. One big batch a year, right?
Yeah, one big batch a year. But luckily, year to year, it's easier to consume this malt within the year, because we have a lot of other brewers interested in having this malt.
And so now you all, basically buy that entire batch, and you split off some goes to Live Oak in Texas, and then other brewers just, acquire that malt through you all?
Yeah, and for the existing remaining part, we are totally open for the other brewers, especially, of course, Polish brewers.
Sure.
To contact us, and we just sell the malt to them, and we also donate the malt to home brewers, because if they want to recreate the style, they of course want the original. And which is also quite important for us, because as you may guess, we do it to promote the style, in fact, to help the style to survive, not to sell our own beer, because it's still a niche. Because of that, we have not only released all of the original ingredients, because we even donated our yeast to White Labs, so they can propagate it and sell it worldwide.
Yeah.
Since last November, it's available to everyone.
And this is the 2-strain mix.
Yeah, this is the original strain mix, and which is also important about the strain. We use the strain as a house strain for all the styles that we make in Grodzisk. And also it's like basically impossible to kill, because the slurry that we gave to White Labs was over 200 generations old.
Wow.
We just constantly repeat it. They are impossible to stop.
And those two yeasts exist in some sort of symbiotic state with each other for that many generations without one outcompeting the other.
It's still stable. We got the analysis from the white labs.
Yeah.
And the ratio is still like 2/3 to 1/3.
Huh.
So it's totally stable. No one knows why, but they work in perfect symbiosis. So it's a great strain. And we also released whole of our brewing technology on our website in Polish and English for other brewers to be sure that they do it the original way. But of course, you can do all of the possible variations to, show that this base style can be great to. It's very good to change it, to innovate. Yeah,
sure, that's beautiful, and obviously, you can tell that you love the style itself if you're willing to give up all of the other means of making it. Let's talk a little bit about the malt piece there and the difference between say smoked while green versus smoked after kilning, in terms of how that works out in sensory, because there is another oak smoked wheat malt out there on the market. From your perspective, not to cast any shade on that, but you all definitely didn't want it done that way, and there's a sensory reason for that. Talk to me about the difference in terms of sensory, with the malt that you all had made versus say some of the more another commercially available versions.
Yeah. So the main difference comes from that penetration of the grain by the smoke when the grain is still green, because on one hand you will have the smoke penetrating the whole grain. The whole kernel is slightly smoked, but it can be still delicate. But on the other end, when you have the malt which is already prepared and dried, and then you smoke it, you have to do it quite aggressively to still have some smoke staying on the grain. That's why the simplest comparison is when you have the Grodziskie malt made in Bruntal and the other oak smoke malts. Usually, Grodziskie malt seems to be less smoky when you smoke it, when you smell it.
Smell it, okay.
But when you use it in the process, or when you eat the grain, you have this additional kick of a smoke that was hidden inside the grain. So the character is, of course, pretty much close. You can still do a decent Grodziskie using other oak smoke wheat malts, but still there's some subtle differences that make this one, for us, of course, slightly better. And of course, the malt, which was smoked green, is more stable over time. Meaning
really?
you don't lose the smokiness. Because, of course, you lose the smokiness from the outer layer.
In the beer or in the grain itself?
In the grain itself.
Okay.
Like after even 2 years.
So you would need to then, if you were using a different one, use it faster, use it fresher.
Yeah.
Whereas you can, the green smoked malt can survive longer before you brew with it.
Yeah, precisely.
In terms of sensory of the character of smoke in the beer itself, how is that different between using those two grains? And you all run a competition every year for home brewers. You've had many Grodziskies made with all of these different malts.
The differences are for us mainly like the character of the smoke itself is pretty similar, but it is more like rounded, subtle, slightly sweeter when you smoke it green. And it's slightly more spicy and like stronger phenolics when you smoke it when the malt was already dried. But luckily, in a beer, with time, and of course, Grodziskie is a great beer because of the smoke. It's even though, of course, you recommend to drink it fresh, but still, it ages pretty nice. And even after a few months, the differences between the malts are slightly smaller. And of course, both of the beers age very well because of the preservation qualities of the smoke. Yeah.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the process then. So we've talked about ingredients, we've talked about yeast, we've talked about malt. We actually haven't talked about water. Let's talk about water before we get into the process. You mentioned that there's a bit of mystique around the water source. But for you all, what is the you get to just use the water from Grodzisk. What does that water look like, from a brewing perspective?
So first of all, this water is pretty hard.
Yeah.
It has pretty high amount of minerals, especially high in sodium. And even though, of course, the brewers originally in those historic mythical times used this one magical well in the city center, we had the results, also the analysis of the water from 1920s. And luckily, even though we, of course, use city water now, we just adjusted to the original amounts of minerals for the style. And of course, analytics of the water are also released on our website, so any brewer can adapt their own water to do it. And luckily, because the water is quite hard, it's probably, easy.
Not too much adjustment for a lot of people.
Not too much adjustment. Reverse osmosis is not needed because usually you just add a lot.
That makes it pretty easy. Well, then let's talk about about process. How do you all go about that brewing process from the mash onwards?
So the first thing, which is very important, is that the beer should be clear, and it's 100% wheat. So it's a challenge, yeah.
Sure.
So the mashing process is quite long, and which is always surprising for the brewers when we recommend it to do it that way. They say, no, it's not needed anymore. Come on, modern malts are quite well modified. The protein rest, it should be even up to 1 hour to be sure that all of the proteins are digested. And it has two reasons. One is the clarity of the final beer, and the other one is the lautering, which of course can be really hard. Mm-hmm. So even before the protein rest, in the original recipe, and we also do it that way, because we have a wet mill in Grodzisk, it's slightly easier. You still have this additional rest around 30 degrees to only loosen the malt a bit. And afterwards, up to 1 hour protein rest. And then
we should say all temperatures in Celsius, just in case it's not clear for everyone. Some of the European brewers on this trip have reminded me that we should convert to metric and Celsius for them. For their benefit, they can enjoy this episode because everything will be in metric and in Celsius.
Yes, so the protein rest is, of course, at 52 degrees centigrade. The first rest around 30-something. Then it's pretty much standard, so we have this rest at 62 degrees centigrade, then 72. Then you heat it up to like 78. And also, which is quite important for lautering, usually you add either rice husks or even oat husk. Historically, they even used hay in Grodzisk. But the problem with hay is that you have, of course, you have the bacteria in hay. Even with the dried one, you have the spores. And some of the spores may be able to even survive the boil. So it can lead to some infections. That's why it's not so good. And also another approach was to use hop cones at the lautering.
Oh, interesting.
But of course, it can lead to other problems, meaning if you don't have access to hop cones throughout the year, of course, then you slightly change the profile of the beer. So basically, rice is the best solution. Right. You just add the husk, and basically it goes quite well, because if the beer has like 7.7 Plato, even though it's 100% wheat, the lautering is pretty, as for the style, it's pretty easy because the beer is quite light, yeah?
Right.
And then during the boil, of course, historically they added only hops for the bittering stage. Mm-hmm. But to increase this slight balanced hoppy notes, we still do some minor late additions and like very symbolical dry hopping. Mm-hmm. Of course, all with tomyski when possible.
Tell me about tomyski hops.
Yeah, tomyski is pretty much similar to Lublin or Saaz, but with a distinctive note of like slightly more orangey, citrusy bites, some red fruits, something like that. But basically, of course, for the brewers that cannot access tomyski, replacing it with Lublin or Saaz, it's a very good replacement.
Yeah. What's the typical alpha range for the tomyski hops?
Tomyski is also those
In that
fours, fives, something like that. Yeah. And also, which was a thing historically, and now we still use it, to have higher microbial stability. Because the beer is light, so the risk of infection is quite high.
Right.
We also use aged hops. Just like in
aged hops.
Just like in lambics, yeah.
So tell me about that. Aged hops and Grodziskie.
So basically, of course,
and this is in addition to or in place of the
bittering hops.
Okay.
It's like now we use like half of the bitterness comes from the fresh bitter hops, and half of it calculated back based on the alpha contents in the aged hops that we can get from the market. Half of the alpha comes from the old hops. But of course, they still have then huge amounts of beta acids. That's why the beer is safer in terms of bacterial stability.
So even though the IBU load may look like one thing on the recipe, you are actually piling in more hops there and actually potentially even getting a little more hop flavor because you're using some of those aged hops, and even if you're not getting the straight IBU contribution from them.
Yeah, you still get this hoppy flavor impact. And of course, because you use it as bittering, it doesn't matter how old the hops are because all of the flavors just come through during the boil, yeah?
Right. Well, what kind of impact? I mean, when I think about aged hops, I also think about some of that almost cheesy character, which sometimes can be a distraction. When you use aged hops and Grodziskie, how do you use them and how do you evaluate? And you're using aged pellets, right? You're not using aged whole cone hops.
Yeah, we use pellets, and as I said before, when you use it during the boil, this cheesy accent do not even come through in the beer.
Okay.
And of course, because it's quite light beer, and even when you aim to have this around 25 to 35 IBUs in the finished beer, having half of that from the aged hops, it's just a minor addition of the old hops at the beginning of the boil, so it doesn't have any impact on the flavor.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about what is your historical ABV for Grodziskie?
Historically, it was always between 2.5 to 3.1, and now we do mostly it's 3.1. And during the process of bottle fermentation, we get this remaining like 0.5. So when it goes to the bottles, it has around 2.5, and it gets this 0.5 during the bottle fermentation process.
Okay.
Which is carried out like 3 weeks in 23, 25 degrees centigrade.
Cool. So you're right. Like what you're saying is this is just still a very small amount of hops because these are very small beers in general. So then, anything else to that hot side process? Just a initial bittering addition, and then just a little bit later on, for a little bit of hop character.
Yeah, it's the addition that we do at whirlpool stage is probably like calculating back on at our brew house when we cast out 100 hectoliters. We use on the whirlpool stage like probably 2.5 kilograms of tomyski. So probably we get from this part of the process like additional 2 or 3 IBUs, not more. But still, you get the hop flavor there, yeah.
Sure.
And then it goes to the fermentation, and our fermentation is only done in open fermenters, as it was before.
Yeah. In
the original setup, and we usually start at 12 degrees centigrade. And then
what kind of in terms of geometry for these, are these square open fermenters? Are these cylindrical open fermenters? Are these more new school, or are they?
Yeah, they are square.
Okay,
they are square. And we start at 12. Then we ramp up to 15 degrees centigrade.
Okay,
but the C strain is extremely fast, which also makes it very easy to
and
handle.
It's just small beer and very fast.
And so basically, the main fermentation of Grodziskie is done within 3 days.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we cold crush it to gather the yeast back. to use it again
Sure.
forever. And then the beer stays for like a couple of weeks to settle down.
This is the worst commercial thing for White Labs to produce if you can just keep using it without having to get new props of it. Although I guess you'd have to brew so much Grodziskie all the time that to maintain that kind of culture, right?
Yeah. Sure. But still, of course, on the other hand, this is our safety backup if something happens. Yeah. But still, after this fermentation, it only needs some time. And again, when we start the bottle fermentation, you need those additional 3 weeks.
Right.
So in fact, even though the fermentation is quite quick, the whole process for such a light beer is pretty long because it's total or 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah. That's interesting. Is there anything else to how you finish it? Obviously, the beer is it has the nickname, the Polish champagne. High effervescence is a big piece of this. So a significant amount of carbonation then in the bottle.
Yeah, this is of course one of the problems with the style, meaning that it's quite hard to do it properly.
Right.
So you cannot achieve these levels of dissolved CO2 without bottle fermentation.
Right.
So you aim at the maximum that you can get without the process if you don't have the possibility to do it.
Right.
But still, the ideal approach is to have between 7.5 to 8.5 grams per liter of CO2. So it's pretty high.
Yeah.
And of course, because of that, you also want the beer to be as clear as possible. Not only because of the looks, but also because of the nucleation. If you had some particles in the beer, you would have immediate gushing upon opening. So before we start bottle fermentation, we centrifuge the yeast or other sediments in the beer to add fresh yeast and fresh priming sugar, because this is the only way to keep it clear. And historically, there was even finings used. So they used, the name of the finings, isinglass.
Isinglass, yeah.
So they use mostly isinglass. Now, thanks to centrifuge, it's not needed anymore because the dosage of the yeast that we add to the bottles, since we have a lab for that, we aim to 2 million cells per milliliter. So it's very low addition, even if you hold a bottle of original Grodziskie. Only if you mix it, you see a small cloudy sediment at the bottom. It's totally minimal amount that you need to maintain healthy bottle fermentation.
Oh, interesting. Well, is there anything else to the classic Grodziskie, or should we talk about some of the more modern iterations? It's interesting to me, or I guess I can answer that question before I keep going on. Do you think we've covered everything that?
I think for the base style we covered all, and of course the access of you have full access for the information, so all the brewers can check it out, and of course they can still ask me or you and get the info.
Of course. So let's talk about some of the the more contemporary iterations of Grodziske. I love the idea that this historical style is maintained in its classic form and this true to history form. But as much as you all love that history and celebrate that history, and celebrate the style for that, you're also not afraid of celebrating more modern iterations, more creative iterations, and seeing where people can go with it. It's a beautiful history, but it's not one that's locked in time, and can't be touched. It's also, something that's that's a living history and so talk to me about how brewers and you all make some of these, also some special iterations of Grodziske. What are some of the major channels that those directions start going? Yeah,
so the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about different iterations of the style is, of course, homebrewers, because they are the most innovative ones, because they have all the crazy ideas without the risk of commercializing. So the first thing that we thought about, because there was already existing Grodziskie homebrewers competition in the city of Grodzisk, even before the brewery was reactivated.
Right.
So then we decided to help this competition a bit. And now it's been already several years of this homebrewers competition held at the brewery, when we have two categories. One category is original Grodziskie, when of course homebrewers try to mimic the original. And in that category, of course, there's some money as prize and some ingredients, original glass, whatever merch.
Right.
But there's also another category, which is totally open category, variation on Grodziskie. And basically, almost everything is allowed. We have only one thing that cannot be allowed because the prize is brewing with us on our system. So once in a year, we release a big batch of homebrewers beer that won the last year. So we forbid the use of Brettanomyces because the risk is too high to introduce them.
Sure.
But all the other variations are totally allowed, and even the plateau range is from 7 to 15. So you can basically do even a double Grodziskie and win the homebrewers competition if the beer is good enough.
Yeah.
But of course, we still want to maintain in different proportions, but still have something from the original style in these variations. But the creativity of the brewers is totally crazy, as you said in the beginning of this episode. We even had Grodziskie with smoked herring. It was interesting.
I bet.
But it was fantastic, creative. From the variations that I remember from the last year or previous years that didn't won in the end, but they were great. For example, you could think about it. Grodziskie with chipotle peppers. It works so well to have this additional layer of smoke and slight spiciness, slight heat from the chipotle. It was fantastic beer. But of course, then you have different amounts of heat that you could say they are optimal. So for some of the judges, it was definitely too much. For some of the judges being chillheads, it was like, it could be even more. So sadly, this one didn't won. But we had Grodziskie, of course, with some herbs, spices like juniper and cardamom. We had entries with Grodziskies slightly soured on purpose with bacteria because bacteria are allowed. Because in the end, we can get rid of that quite easily.
Sure.
And you also have those approaches with different smokes used, like peated Grodziskie,
Sure.
dark Grodziskie, and so on and so on. And also, not only homebrewers, because as you can imagine, a lot of our friends from other craft breweries in Poland do several innovative approaches to Grodziskie. Of course, the first thing that you think of, like an easy way to modify it and make it more modern. We even have one variation in Grodziskie brewed by our own, called Modern Grodziskie, with dry hopping with modern, new varieties of Polish hops.
Oh, okay.
But then also Polish brewers on a commercial scale do a lot of, for example, Citra dry hopped Grodziskies with tea, Grodziskies with New Zealand hops, and so on and so on. So it's alive. It's pretty much alive.
Interesting. Not something that I would necessarily have expected for such a light historical smoked beer, but cool that is more just let's celebrate this kind of history.
I also remember one commercially made Grodziskie, which was quite a crazy idea, but also a good one. You probably know this cheese from the mountainside in Poland, the smoked cheese. Called Ostypek. So they made this cheese is often served with cranberries. So they made a Grodziskie with this cheese and cranberries.
Fascinating. Well, it's interesting, and of course, what comes to my mind, I mean, the idea of hops and smoke, in a lot of ways, seem kind of like they have that potential to fight, but at the same time, smoke and more fruity notes. I mean, that's a natural combination because, in every kind of barbecue or smoked meat or whatnot, you definitely have some of that kind of fruity character. That's just part of the whole, it happens through that kind of process. And so figuring out how to make sure that those work nicely together becomes its own thing. And we've, certainly there are brewers out there. There's one brewer that I know, Brian, out in Oregon, who smokes his own hops on purpose. It seems like this might be the perfect thing if a brewer has a batch of smoke-tainted hops from the Pacific Northwest after a forest fire. Like, let's just make a Grodziskie with it. But in your mind, like when you describe it from a sensorial perspective, what should a historically rooted Grodziskie taste like? How do you all describe what the beer actually is when you're drinking it? Because I have had more kind of crisp and tighter kind of Grodziska. Yours actually tastes, from the brewery, tastes pretty full. Surprisingly full for such a small, low ABV beer. Talk to me from a sensory perspective about how you describe the beer.
Yeah, so this style, for me, the most important part is the balance of all the parts. So you have this slight wheaty backbone. You have, again, slight addition of smoke to it, slight hoppiness, and of course, it should be highly drinkable. When you get those, this like false fullness because the beer is very dry, it comes mainly from the smoke. It gives you this, illusion of fullness.
Right.
That's because probably in comparison to other very light beers, thanks to the smoke, it doesn't feel empty.
Right.
It doesn't feel like totally watery, even though it's watery, yeah, in fact. But of course...
And it's a fullness, but not like a phenolic sharpness from the smoke. And I think that was the interesting thing, tasting your iteration of it, just how round that smoke character feels rather than that kind of typical or what I associate with smoked beer, which is always a sharper phenolic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It gives you this this round feeling just because also the character of the process of drying this specific malt, and also from character of oak smoking, because oak smoking gives you this more round, pleasant smokiness rather than harsh.
Yeah.
And of course, the most important thing in Grodziskie is, and we started it even 2 years ago at European Beer Star when we had the privilege to introduce new style to all of the judges. And it's quite common misconception. Grodziskie is never sour, even though when there are iterations that are extremely dry, because mainly other sources of malt or whatever, they are never sour, because that is what distinguishes Grodziskie from Lichtenheiner. But of course, for some of the consumers that would expect more fullness from the beer, they can say it's so dry that they can associate with sourness, but still the pH is in quite normal level.
Yeah. So it is a category now at European Beer Star.
Yeah, and we did a lot of work as Polish Craft Brewers Association, as the brewery. A lot of homebrewers helped us. So we had this category at EBS since 2 years. And we also, thanks Chris Williams, we also updated the description of the style for the World Beer Cup, because the old description prepared years ago was slightly off the original values, let's say.
Gotcha.
So it stated that, and you tasted a couple of Grodziskies in Poland probably, it stated that it's overly smoke dominated on all other qualities. And it shouldn't be aggressively smoked like Bamberg smoked beers.
Right,
it should be like just a pinch. That's why, luckily, we were able to update the style guidelines. And of course, I hope that thanks to that, more Polish brewers will send their Grodziskies to the competition next year. But in fact, it's now. We should register this week, probably.
It should be now. Right. And you all are, adding a professional category to your own competition with the homebrewers to also try to, help grow the world of Grodziskie brewing.
Yeah, that was the next step for us, not to only promote the style among the homebrewers. And I have to add that last year we almost had more entrants from outside Poland than from Poland, because we even had a consolidation point in Spain. So we had a lot of entries from Spain, Latvia. We had entries from Argentina, US, Brazil, but they were, of course, only homebrewers. But a lot of professional brewers asked us, could I send you my commercial beer? I want to participate in the competition. I don't want to win, but I want feedback. Please tell me whether it's original Grodziskie or not. So we decided, let's make it available also to professional brewers. But as the same as with homebrewers competition, is totally free of charge, because we don't do it to raise any money.
For the love of Grodziskie.
Yeah. We do it for the love of Grodziskie. And we also wanted to treat this now not only homebrewers competition, as a benchmark for the brewers from outside Poland to later send the beers to, for example, European Beer Star or World Beer Cup, because we want them to be sure that they're aligned with the idea. Because of course, when you don't have any brewer in your country brewing Grodziskie, you cannot even compare.
There's no calibration when there's no comparison or anything. Sure. Well, that's interesting. Well, we've been talking for a while on this. It's exciting to see more about Grodziskie. I know Stan Hieronymus is going to absolutely love this episode because obviously he and I talk about Grodziskie all the time.
Oh, he's a huge ambassador of the style.
A huge ambassador of the style. But even Randy Mosher was telling us a great story about how in the 90s, the famed beer writer Michael Jackson was visiting him in Chicago, that he'd brewed a Grodziskie back then just for Michael, and actually smoked his own malt even back there. And so there's this, it's really fun to see, here in Poland, how it's all coming together with a love of Grodziskie, and we're learning more about this. And now hopefully we can share even more of the Grodziskie story out there correctly with the world of brewing. Well, Marcin, are there any big takeaways? If you're speaking to brewers trying to make their own Grodziskie, what do you think are some of the most important things to always keep in mind when they're brewing these?
First thing, as I said probably a couple of times, is the balance.
Yeah.
The next thing, which is very important to us, it's always reach out to us, because if you have any questions, we are totally open for this. And of course, even again, for the love of the style, if any brewer in any part of the world brews Grodziskie, we are totally happy to share the info about it to, help them introduce the style on their market. And we already had Grodziskie from Brazil, Panama, Argentina, India, Italy, Japan, other countries following. And we love to stay in contact with those brewers to even exchange their experience, because, they start from scratch, they treat it as something totally new, and they might have even more interesting feedback than the info that we have from Polish brewers that do it, because they have different raw materials, they do it differently in some way, and they also have the thing that we do not have. They will have the feedback from their own consumers. And we know already that in countries with, hot, humid climate, Grodziskie is selling way better than in Poland. Because, for example, in southern Brazil or in Mexico, people treat Grodziskie as a perfect first quencher, as it is, in fact, also here. But then there are countries where people are more accustomed to smoke in the dishes and beverages, so it's totally natural for them.
That's true, and especially in hot climates, those very light, incredibly pale, but also flavorful and full beer. I mean, it does seem perfectly suited for that kind of thing. Well, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chiller's Elite 290 Series Chiller uses propane as a natural refrigerant with extremely low global warming potential. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. And trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing. Of course you should do that. Marcin, if people want to learn more about the Grodzisk brewery, about the style Grodziskie that you all brew at that historical brewery, and they want to make their own, where can they find more information about that?
Basically, they could head to browargrodzisk.com, but they could also find the brewery at Instagram, Facebook, whatever. In the end, it will always land on my desk. So basically, because we are very active and we love to respond, I almost guarantee that they will have their answer within, 24 or 48 hours.
Slide into his DMs. That's what you're saying. Well, I appreciate you talking about Grodziskie with me here in Krakow, and it's been nice drinking some of your beer. I will say it's the first time that I've had a brewing event bus beer en route to another to beer tour where I've been handed bottle of Grodziskie just to drink on the bus, but that's the experience here. And I know Stan's going to be jealous when I say that. Anyway, thanks for talking with me. Cheers.
Thank you.
Or I should say, na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.